At 91, I have finally learned something that took me most of my life to understand. Being honest with everyone is not the same thing as being honest with yourself. My name is Evelyn Margaret Hayes. I am 91 years old. And if you had met me when I was 30, you probably would have thought I was the kind of woman who believed secrets were dangerous. I did. I believed people should talk. I believed husbands should tell their wives everything. Parents should explain themselves to their children. Friends should share their pain. And if something was bothering you, you should say it. I thought silence was a wall. I thought honesty was a door. What I didn't understand was that sometimes a door should have a lock. I was born in 1935 in a little house where the kitchen was always warmer than the rest of the rooms. My father smelled like tobacco and machine oil. My mother smelled like lavender soap. I married my husband, Daniel, when I was 23. We had 3 children. I spent decades taking care of other people's feelings. I apologized when I wasn't wrong. I explained myself when nobody had asked. I told people things they had not earned the right to know simply because I thought openness made me a good person. And then life began taking people from me. Daniel died first, then my closest friend, Margaret, then my older brother, and 7 years ago, I buried my youngest son, Thomas. At 91, you don't count your life by birthdays anymore. You count it by the people whose names are no longer answered when you call them. And that is when something strange happens. You stop caring so much about being understood. You start caring about being at peace. So today, I want to tell you about 10 things I no longer tell people. Not because I am ashamed, not because I am afraid, but because I finally understand that some truths are like photographs. Once you hand them to someone, you cannot control what they do with them. And before I tell you the 10 things, I want you to remember one sentence. You are allowed to have parts of yourself that belong only to you. I learned that lesson slowly, much too slowly. The first mistake I made was believing that if I explained my pain clearly enough, the person who caused it would finally understand. I was 37 when I learned otherwise. My mother said something to me one afternoon. I won't repeat it. Not because it was terrible, because after all these years, the exact words no longer matter. What mattered was what they did to me. I had carried those words for years. So one evening, I sat across from her and finally told her everything. I told her how much it hurt, how often I thought about it, how many nights I had cried without telling anyone. I expected an apology. Instead, my mother looked at me and said, "I didn't know you were that sensitive." That sentence stayed with me longer than the original insult, because suddenly my pain had become a personality flaw. I went home and sat at my kitchen table. Daniel came in, saw my face, and didn't ask questions. He simply made tea. That was one of the reasons I loved him. He understood that sometimes love means not demanding an explanation. That night, I realized something. Not everyone has the emotional hands required to hold your deepest wounds. Some people can hear your pain and comfort you. Others hear your pain and judge it. Others remember it. And sometimes, without even intending to, they use it against you later. So I changed. I still tell the people I trust when something hurts, but I no longer hand everyone the entire map of my wounds. There is a difference between saying, "You hurt me," and saying, "Here is exactly where I am broken." The second one is sacred. Give it carefully, because your pain belongs to you, and the person who caused it has not automatically earned the right to know every corner of it. Your regrets are not advice for someone else's life. They are the private diary of the person you used to be. For years, people asked me, "If you could go back, what would you change?" I used to answer. I would tell them about the art school I never finished, the trip to Italy I postponed, the job I refused because my children were young, the friendship I destroyed with one careless sentence, the opportunity I was too afraid to take. I thought sharing my regrets made me wise. Sometimes it only made other people feel justified in their own choices. My friend Clara learned this the hard way. She once told her adult daughter that she regretted staying in her marriage so long. She also said she wished she had traveled more. Her daughter didn't hear wisdom. She heard guilt. For months she wondered, did Mom sacrifice her entire life because of me? Clara had never intended that. She was simply trying to be honest. But that's the danger of regret. Once you release it, someone else may carry it differently. Your "I wish I had" can become their "maybe I ruined your life." Your "I should have" can become their "maybe I should hate myself." So I learned to keep some regrets quiet. Not because I deny them. I acknowledge them. I sit with them. I learn from them. But I don't always put them in another person's hands. There are things I would change. Of course there are. I am 91, not a saint. But I refuse to spend the rest of my life turning my past into a courtroom. Some choices were wrong, some were right, some were simply choices, and sometimes that is enough. Money doesn't just change what people think about you. Sometimes it changes the way they look at you before you even say another word. When Daniel died, I discovered something frightening. I knew almost nothing about our finances. He had handled most of it. I knew we had a house. I knew we had savings, but I didn't know the details. After he died, I had to learn. It took months. Eventually, I discovered we were financially safer than I had believed. I told my daughter, Rebecca. I trusted her. But Rebecca told her husband. He was a good man. Yet something changed. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't suddenly become greedy. He simply became more careful around me. And I noticed. People think changes have to be enormous to matter. They don't. A pause before someone speaks can tell you everything. Years later, another woman in my neighborhood, Helen, told everyone she was struggling financially. At first, people were kind. Then they became protective. Then they became pitying. And eventually, Helen became the poor woman. They stopped seeing the woman who had spent 40 years sewing clothes for other people. They stopped seeing her humor. They saw her circumstances. That taught me something. Money can become a label. Whether you have too much or too little, people may stop seeing you and start seeing your bank account. So now I share financial information only when someone genuinely needs to know. Your finances are not your identity. Protecting them is not dishonesty. It is wisdom. Some relationships end with a story. Others end with a wound. And wounds do not always belong in public. My sister Rose and I didn't speak for 11 years. Everyone had an explanation. Some thought it was money. Others thought it was jealousy. One cousin believed it was because of our husbands. They were all wrong. There was a specific thing that happened. It changed everything. But I will never tell you what it was. Rose has been gone for 12 years now. And the secret is still mine to carry. Some people believe you owe everyone an explanation. Why did you leave him? Why don't you talk to her? What happened between you? Tell me the real story. But sometimes telling the real story means exposing someone who isn't there to defend themselves. I have heard people tell stories about former spouses years after divorce. They say, "Now I can finally tell the truth." But often, the truth isn't being told for honesty. It is being told for relief. They want to put the burden down. And when they do, someone else has to pick it up. I learned that lesson when my neighbor, Patricia, divorced her husband after 31 years. For months, everyone asked her what happened. At first, she said, "We simply couldn't make each other happy anymore." That answer wasn't enough for people. They wanted details. They wanted evidence. They wanted someone to blame. Eventually, at a dinner party, Patricia told the whole story. The room became quiet. Everyone listened. And for the first time, she felt understood. But the next morning, she regretted it. Not because the story wasn't true. Because now 8 people knew something that had once belonged to 2. And 8 people became 12. 12 became 20. By the time the story reached me, it barely resembled what Patricia had originally told them. That is what happens to private pain when it becomes public information. It grows legs, it develops opinions, it acquires details that never happened. So I learned to stop explaining endings. You can say, "It wasn't healthy for me." You can say, "I had to leave." You can say, "We couldn't continue." You don't have to hand someone the entire autopsy of a dead relationship. Some doors close because they have to. You don't need to stand outside the door explaining why the key no longer works. Sometimes peace begins when you stop defending a decision that you already know was necessary. One of the most dangerous sentences you can say to someone you love is, "You're making a mistake." I know because I said it. I said it to my son, Michael. He was 32 when he told me he wanted to leave his secure job and start a small business with a friend. I immediately panicked. I imagined bankruptcy. I imagined embarrassment. I imagined him coming back home at 40 with nothing. So I told him, "Michael, I think you're making a terrible mistake." I thought I was protecting him. I thought age had given me wisdom, but age had only given me experience. Those are not the same thing. Michael left his job. He started the business. And for the first 2 years, it struggled. I secretly thought I had been right. Then something changed. The business survived. It grew. Eventually, he hired 12 people. 20 years later, that company paid for his children's college education. And I learned the most humiliating lesson of my life. I had mistaken my fear for wisdom. I had looked at his future through the window of my own past. That is something parents do all the time. We see danger because we remember pain. We see foolishness because we remember our own mistakes. We think we know where the road ends because we've walked a similar road before. But another person's life is not our life. Another person's risk is not our risk. Another person's lesson may require a mistake that we desperately wish we could prevent. There are exceptions. If someone is in danger, speak. If someone is being abused, speak. If someone is about to make a decision that could cause irreversible harm, speak. But if your objection is simply, "I wouldn't do that," be quiet. "I don't like that person," be careful. "I don't understand why you would choose this." Wait, because sometimes people don't need your answer. They need the freedom to discover their own. I eventually apologized to Michael. He laughed and said, "Mom, you were trying to protect me." He was right. But good intentions don't erase consequences. Sometimes love means giving advice. Sometimes love means standing nearby while someone makes a decision you wouldn't make. And sometimes the wisest thing an older person can say is, "I don't completely understand your choice, but I trust you to live with it." Loneliness is real, but once you announce it to the world, people may stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a problem. I know that sounds harsh, but I learned it after Daniel died. The first year after his death was strange. People came, flowers arrived, casseroles appeared at my door. Neighbors called. My children visited. Everyone wanted to help. And then, slowly, everyone returned to their own lives. That is normal. It is not cruelty. People have jobs, children, bills, problems, their own aging parents, their own marriages, their own exhaustion. But my house remained quiet. One evening, I told a neighbor named Susan, "I feel terribly alone." She immediately became worried. She started calling every morning. Then my daughter heard. She began sending me lists of senior centers, classes, church groups, walking clubs, volunteer opportunities. She meant well, but suddenly my loneliness had become a project. People weren't asking, "How are you?" They were asking, "Did you go to the class? Did you call the center? Did you meet anyone?" I began feeling guilty for being lonely. And that is when I understood something. You don't always need someone to fix loneliness. Sometimes you need someone to sit beside you inside it. I had one person who could do that. Her name was Martha. She would come over, sit at my kitchen table, pour herself coffee, and say, "You don't have to be cheerful today." That sentence was more valuable than every social program anyone had ever offered me, because she didn't try to repair me. She simply stayed. So yes, tell someone you trust when you're lonely. Tell the person who can hear it without turning you into a responsibility. But don't announce your loneliness to everyone. Protect the dignity of your sadness. You are not broken because you sometimes want someone beside you. You are human. And there is a difference. Forgiveness spoken too early can become another lie you are forced to live with. I learned this with my daughter, Anna. We had a terrible argument when she was 48. It wasn't one sentence. It wasn't one event. It was years of small disappointments that eventually became one enormous explosion. We didn't speak properly for almost 2 years. When we finally sat together, Anna cried. I cried. We hugged. And I said, "I forgive you." But the truth was more complicated. I wanted to forgive her. I wanted the pain to disappear. I wanted our family to become normal again. But wanting forgiveness and feeling forgiveness are not the same thing. For the next several years, little things would reopen the wound. A missed birthday call, a decision she made without consulting me, something she said at Christmas. I would suddenly feel that old anger, and then I would feel ashamed because I had already told her I had forgiven her. I thought something was wrong with me. Eventually, I realized I had made a promise my heart wasn't ready to keep. Real forgiveness is not a performance. It doesn't arrive because someone asks for it. It doesn't arrive because Christmas is coming. It doesn't arrive because everyone else is tired of the conflict. Sometimes forgiveness takes years. Sometimes it arrives slowly. Sometimes it looks less like forgetting and more like remembering without needing revenge. When I finally forgave Anna, I didn't make an announcement. I simply noticed one morning that the old anger wasn't there anymore. That was enough. I didn't need applause. I didn't need her to know the exact day it happened. Forgiveness belongs to the person doing the forgiving. So don't rush it. If you're not ready, say, "I'm trying." If you need time, say, "I need time." Those words are more honest than pretending your heart has already arrived somewhere it hasn't. A parent may love every child deeply and still feel closer to one at a certain moment in life. That truth should never become a competition. I had 3 children, and if you asked me which one I loved most at different points in my life, the answer would have changed. Not because my love disappeared, because people change, relationships change, circumstances change. When my daughter Rebecca was young, she was the child who understood me best. She could look at my face and know I was worried before I said anything. When my son Michael became an adult, he became the one who called me every Sunday. There were years when I felt closest to him. Then there was Thomas, my youngest. Thomas was difficult, not bad, just complicated. He struggled. He made choices that frightened me. I worried about him constantly, and sometimes worry feels strangely similar to love. Thomas died when he was 56. I still have his handwriting on an old grocery list. Milk, bread, coffee, 3 ordinary words. I kept the paper. People think grief is about big things, funerals, photographs, birthdays. But sometimes grief hides inside a grocery list, a handwriting sample, a voice recording, a chair nobody sits in anymore. I never told my children which one I loved most, and now that I am 91, I am grateful. Because love is not a scoreboard. Children should never have to compete with their siblings for a place in their mother's heart. And parents should never create that competition with careless words. Say, "I love you." Say, "I'm proud of you." Say, "You matter to me." Say those things freely, but keep comparisons private. Because a sentence spoken casually by a parent can live inside a child for 70 years. I know. I've seen it happen. At 91, I am not afraid of dying every day. But some nights, at 3 in the morning, I am terrified. There, I said it. I think many people my age feel the same way. We just don't always say it. Sometimes I wake up before dawn. The house is completely silent. And suddenly I remember, one day I will wake up for the last time. There will be a morning when I don't make coffee, a birthday I don't reach, a Christmas where my chair stays empty. That thought can be frightening, but I have learned to keep some of that fear private, because when you tell everyone you are afraid of dying, something changes. Your children start watching you differently. Every phone call feels more important. Every visit becomes a possible goodbye. Every ordinary moment begins carrying the weight of an ending. I don't want that. I don't want my grandchildren sitting beside me thinking, is this the last time? I want them to argue with me about politics. I want them to complain about traffic. I want them to tell me about their jobs. I want ordinary life. Give me an ordinary Tuesday. Give me a burnt piece of toast. Give me a television program I complain about. Give me rain against the window. Give me the sound of someone washing dishes in the kitchen. I don't want every moment to become a memorial before I am gone. So yes, talk about death. Prepare your documents. Tell your doctor about your fears. Write your wishes down. Talk to someone you deeply trust. But don't make every person who loves you carry your fear. Some burdens are lighter when shared with the right person. They become heavier when scattered among everyone. This is perhaps the hardest truth I learned. Mourning the person you could have been can steal the time you still have to become someone new. There was another Evelyn. I know there was. She was the woman who might have finished college, the woman who might have become an artist, the woman who might have traveled across Europe alone, the woman who might have taken that job in Boston, the woman who might never have married Daniel. Sometimes I think about her, especially when I walk through an art gallery. I imagine her standing there, older, different, perhaps happier, perhaps miserable. Who knows? That is the problem. We romanticize lives we never lived because we never had to experience their consequences. The Evelyn who went to Paris might have become lonely. The Evelyn who became an artist might have struggled financially. The Evelyn who never married might have regretted not having children. We don't know. We only imagine the beautiful parts. I spent years comparing my real life to an imaginary one, and my real life always lost. Then one afternoon, I found an old box. Inside were drawings I had made when I was 26. They weren't masterpieces. Some were terrible. But I looked at them and suddenly understood. That young woman didn't disappear. She became me. She carried her dreams into the life I actually lived. Maybe I didn't become the artist I imagined, but I became the woman who still notices light, who still stops in front of paintings, who still keeps pencils in the kitchen. Maybe that is enough. You don't need to become every version of yourself you once imagined. You only need to stop punishing yourself for the versions you didn't become. The past contains possibilities. It does not contain instructions. At 91, I would rather live the life I have than spend another year mourning the life I don't. If I could sit across from my 40-year-old self today, I would tell her one thing. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who they think you are. I would tell her, you don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need everyone to approve. You don't need to tell everyone your pain. You don't need to explain every ending. You don't need to reveal every regret. You don't need to announce every fear. And you certainly don't need to turn your entire inner life into public property just to prove that you're honest. I spent decades believing that transparency was the same thing as intimacy. It isn't. Intimacy is earned. Trust is earned. Access is earned. There are people who deserve the deepest parts of you. Give those people everything. Tell them the ugly things. Tell them the beautiful things. Tell them when you're afraid. Tell them when you're lonely. Tell them when you're hurt. But not everyone belongs in that room. I learned this from a young woman who visited me last year. Her name was Sophie. She was 29. She told me she believed in complete honesty. She told me she had no secrets. She told everyone everything. Her relationships, her finances, her arguments, her fears, her private conversations. She believed this made her brave. I listened. Then I smiled, and I said, "That sounds exhausting, sweetheart." She laughed because she thought I was joking. I wasn't. At 91, I no longer want to be understood by everyone. I want to be known by the right people. There is a difference. And if you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. Not every truth needs an audience. Some truths are meant for your journal. Some are meant for your spouse. Some are meant for your closest friend. Some are meant for your doctor. Some are meant for God. And some are meant only for you. That doesn't make you dishonest. It makes you human. Your private thoughts are not a crime. Your unanswered questions are not a failure. Your regrets do not need witnesses. Your grief does not need an explanation. And your past does not need a courtroom. At 91, I have finally stopped trying to convince everyone that I was right. I have stopped trying to make everyone understand why I made certain choices. I have stopped telling stories that don't belong to me alone. And strangely enough, I have never felt more honest. Because honesty isn't saying everything. Sometimes honesty is knowing what not to say. So tonight, when you are alone, ask yourself something. What have you been telling people simply because you are afraid they will misunderstand you? What part of yourself have you been explaining over and over? What pain have you been handing to people who never learned how to hold it? What regret have you been repeating until it became your identity? And what version of yourself are you still mourning? You don't have to answer me. You don't even have to answer anyone. Just answer yourself. Because at 91, I have learned that peace often begins with a sentence we are too afraid to say. This part of my story belongs to me. And perhaps that is not selfish. Perhaps it is wisdom. Perhaps growing older is not about becoming more open to everyone. Perhaps it is about becoming more selective about who gets to see the deepest parts of you. I have lost people. I have lost years. I have lost opportunities. I have lost versions of myself. But I am still here. And this morning, I woke up. I opened the curtains. I made coffee. The sun came through the window. For a few minutes, I stood there without thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, and I realized something beautiful. I wasn't thinking about the woman I could have been. I wasn't thinking about the things I should have said. I wasn't thinking about the people who misunderstood me. I was simply there, alive, 91 years old, still learning, still breathing, still becoming. And if that is the final lesson of my life, I think I can live with it. You don't have to tell everyone everything. You only have to make sure that when the room becomes quiet and you are finally alone with yourself, you haven't spent your entire life hiding the truth from the one person who mattered most, you.